The toll road descends toward Ensenada like a serpent following the spine of the Baja Peninsula, and there, just before the city swallows you whole, lies Salsipuedes Beach. The name itself whispers a warning. Leave, if you can. From the scenic route above, you can see them, the privately owned tuna farming cages that rise from the dark Pacific waters like skeletal fingers. Corrals suspended between worlds, not close enough to shore for safety, not far enough into the deep to disappear. The locals won't talk about them after dark. False killer whales are not native to Ensenada Bay, yet in recent months they've appeared, always at dusk, always watching. Their intelligence disturbs Juan most, not their size, but the way they observe, the calculated patience in their stillness. They position themselves just beyond the corral lines and study the cages with an intention that makes his hand shake. But it's their scars that keep him awake at night, deep furrows raked across their flanks, too large and too regular to be from propellers or nets. Something scored their flesh with parallel grooves, each mark precise and deliberate, as if they'd been gripped, measured, released. Miguel used to cross himself each time he spotted one. Old Tomas refused to work the evening shift anymore, and no amount of overtime pay would change his mind. "They're not watching the cages," Tomas said the day he quit, his voice barely a whisper. "They're watching for something, making sure it knows we're here." Miguel laughed at him, said he'd gladly take the overtime shifts if Tomas was too scared. That was 3 weeks ago. Every evening, fog crawls across the water with unnatural uniformity, swallowing the cages one by one. And with the fog, the whales change, circling faster, breaching violently, their clicks and calls forming patterns too complex, almost like language, almost like they're calling down. The tuna inside go mad, thrashing against the nets in silver panic, not trying to escape, trying to dive deeper into the cage, as far from the bottom as possible. Juan has watched them press against the surface netting until their gills bleed, anything to put distance between themselves and whatever the cage floor opens to below. The foreman offered Miguel triple overtime for Thursday evening. Equipment inspections on cage 7. Miguel needed the money. New baby, hospital bills. He took it without hesitation. Juan volunteered to stay with him. "Don't work the fog alone," Miguel clapped his shoulder. "They're just animals, hermano, big dolphins." But his hand shook as he packed his equipment. Juan watched from shore as Miguel's boat reached the platform, the sun already setting. By the time Miguel climbed aboard, fog was creeping across the bay. Juan's radio crackled. "I'm here, starting inspection now." For 20 minutes, Juan heard normal sounds. Boots on metal, tools clanging. Then Miguel's breathing changed. Shorter, faster. Juan, his voice was tight. "The whales, they're not circling anymore. They're just floating, facing outward, like they're standing guard. Come back, now, wait. There's something..." A long pause. The water under the platform. It's moving wrong. The whales aren't making waves, but something down there is rising. I can feel the whole cage lifting, Juan. It's... The radio erupted with a sound Juan will never forget. But something worse. A wet, truncated gasp. Then a splash. Too heavy to be a man falling. Too heavy to be anything Juan wants to imagine. The whales began their calls immediately. Triumphant, urgent. And from somewhere far below, something answered with a sound so low, Juan felt it in his chest more than heard it. A vibration that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. "Miguel! Miguel, respond!" Only dead air and the distant sound of water settling. The Coast Guard found Miguel's equipment bag on the platform, his tools laid out neatly. His radio is still transmitting, and at the bottom of cage 7, tangled in the netting 15 feet down, they found his flashlight, still on. The beam pointed down into the darkness where the cage opened to deep water. Miguel was gone. The divers went down the next morning. They surfaced after 7 minutes. Too soon, their faces wrong. The netting at the bottom, Ortiz said, unable to meet anyone's eyes. It's been opened, cut in a perfect circle, wide enough for a man. His voice dropped. But that's not the worst part. What did you see? The foreman demanded. We didn't see anything. That's the problem. Ortiz pulled off his mask with shaking hands. At the bottom of the cage, where the hole opens up, the water there is black, not dark. Black. Our lights wouldn't penetrate it, and when I got close, he stopped, his breath coming faster. Something was blocking the light from below. Something massive, just on the other side of that hole, holding perfectly still. Waiting. Did it move? No. But I felt it, noticing me. And then the whales started circling directly above us, boxing us in, and I knew, his voice broke, I knew we were only allowed to see what it wanted us to see. We surfaced immediately. The second diver hadn't said a word. He sat staring at his hands, at the deep scratches on his wetsuit gloves, scratches that hadn't been there before the dive. Every cage had modifications at the bottom, netting cut, edges folded back, but the holes didn't go all the way through. They stopped at the final layer, leaving just enough barrier that nothing could be blamed, nothing could be proven. The company could say the nets were damaged by equipment, by storms, by anything except the truth. Except in cage 7. In cage 7, the work was complete. The official report lists Miguel as lost at sea, probable drowning. The company paid his widow quietly, with a settlement requiring a non-disclosure agreement. The foreman told the remaining workers to avoid cage 7. But Juan knows Miguel wasn't lost. He was claimed. The whales aren't the threat. They're the servants, the messengers, the things with scars on their flanks that patrol the surface and call down into the deep when prey arrives. They herd the tuna, yes, but not for themselves. They concentrate the fish into dense, panicked schools that press against the cage walls, that leak blood and stress chemicals through the netting, that advertise to whatever hunts from below that food is trapped here, abundant and helpless. And sometimes, when the whales call, they're not signaling about tuna. Last night, Juan worked late on cage 3. As the fog rolled in, he heard them, the whales beginning their strange calls. And from below, from depths that shouldn't exist this close to shore, came that answering vibration, closer than before, stronger. The cage lurched beneath his feet. When he looked over the platform edge, his flashlight beam caught something in the water, not the whales. Something beneath them, turning slowly, testing the weight of the cage above. The water displaced by its movement was wrong, too viscous, too dark, like oil more than ocean. One of the whales surfaced directly in front of him, close enough to touch. It didn't thrash or dive. It simply watched him with an eye too aware, too focused, and in that moment, Juan understood. The whales weren't native to these waters because something summoned them here, trained them, uses them. The whale exhaled, not the clean mist of seawater, but something that smelled of deep trenches and older things. Then it dove, and the pressure beneath the cage released. This time. The foreman asks him every morning, "Any problems last night?" And every morning, Juan says no. Because what would he report? that something lives in the trench beyond the shelf, that it's learned the cages mean food, that it's patient enough to modify the nets slowly, cage by cage, testing which workers notice and which don't, that Miguel wasn't the first. 3 other workers have drowned in the past year, always at cage 7, always in the fog, that he's found the same modification starting at the bottom of cage 3, where he works now. Before his shift tonight, he visited Miguel's widow. She pressed something into his palm. Miguel's rosary. They found it floating in the cage, she whispered. The chain was snapped. But Juan, the beads at the end were crushed, all of them, like something grabbed the rosary while he wore it and pulled. Juan stares at the rosary now as the sun sets over Salsipuedes, as the fog begins its crawl across the bay, as the whales surface and take their positions around cage 3. He counts them, 7 now, more than yesterday. They're all watching him. His shift starts in 10 minutes. The foreman waves him toward the boat. Cage 3 needs servicing. Juan walks toward the dock, Miguel's rosary cold in his pocket, the crushed beads pressing against his palm like a warning. He tries not to think about the sound Miguel made on the radio, that wet, truncated gasp. Tries not to think about what Ortiz said, something massive just on the other side of that hole, holding perfectly still, waiting. Tries not to think about the fact that cage 3 is the same distance from shore as cage 7. The boat engine coughs to life. The fog swallows them whole, and as they cut through the dark water, Juan sees the whales diving, one by one, in perfect synchronization, going deep, announcing his arrival, somewhere far below cage 3, in waters that maps say are only 40 feet deep, but that drop away to impossible black. Something stirs, something that has carved the flesh of whales, something that has learned patience, something that understands the schedule of men who work alone in the fog. The whale's calls echo through the bay, and from the deep comes that answering vibration. Not a sound, but a feeling, a presence, rising.